Okay, welcome back everyone. I have the honor to introduce the next speaker, David Stodden, who is a professor at the Department of Physical Education and Athletic Training at the University of South Carolina. His main research topics are the development of motor competence and its association with physical activity, physical fitness, perceived competence, and body weight status across the lifespan. He published over 40 research articles and book chapters, and his research has been funded by the US National Institute of Health and the National Association of Sport and Physical Education. He gave numerous national and international lectures and multiple international collaborations, and he's involved in many initiatives promoting various aspects of youth physical development in the United States. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Greet, and bonjour. That is about all the French that I know, so we'll go from English from here. I want to thank the organizing committee, specifically Boris, for all the work. It's been a fabulous trip thus far, but I want to make sure we get to this data because 20 minutes is a little bit short for what we want to do. So what I'm going to present today is the current evidence on the association between motor competence and various aspects of health in youth. But first off, I want to be able to address this idea. What is motor competence? And over the years, we have many definitions, many explanations of what motor competence is. And I brought a few of them, provided a few from, anywhere from 1952 in Guthrie to Keogh in 1977, to Hunt from Belgium et al. In 2009, and my own. And basically what we're talking about, if I can address it from a little biomechanical perspective, what is motor competence? It's our capability to coordinate and control our center of mass and our extremities in a gravity-based environment to successfully accomplish a goal or to react to a perturbation. So understanding what motor competence is, it is global. We're talking about global ideas because in the past we've talked about this idea. We see the term motor skill proficiency, motor coordination, fundamental movement skills, skill-related fitness, and motor abilities. We see all types of language that speaks to the idea of how well you can control and coordinate your center mass and extremities in your environment in reaction to the environment. So why should we promote motor competence? Though that's the main question I want to ask today is, does the development of motor competence relate to health? And Dr. Len Almond was asking this question yesterday, and so today I'm like, well, here it is. Here's the evidence that we do have. So in terms of presenting that cumulative evidence, I'll do that in just a second. But I also want you to think about the idea today of developmental trajectories. Not only where we are in time, whether it be early childhood, middle childhood, late childhood, adolescence, adulthood, but understand how the associations, the change in the association strengths across time. So I want you to look long-term at developmental trajectories. Put that in your mind, please. And we also want to look at strengths and weaknesses of the data, strengths and weaknesses of designs, and ideas about how we are looking at the promotion of physical activity, health-related fitness, psychological aspects, perceived competence, self-efficacy, perceived self-worth. And then what next? Where do we go from here? So one important idea that I want to talk about again is we measure motor competence in many different ways with many different types of assessments. We use process or qualitative movement pattern type assessments, i.e. the TGMD, which is very popular in the US. GSA, get skilled, get active. It's an Australian assessment. Developmental sequences, which we use in the United States, CHAMPS and other process-oriented assessment, but we're looking at movement patterns, qualitative movement patterns. But we also need to look at outcome measures. KTK, the German assessment that's used quite a bit over in Europe, MABC, the BOT, the MAND, there are many different types of assessments that we use. But the important idea is that we'll show with the data, maybe it doesn't matter what we use, but maybe it does. So where do we see the importance of developing motor competence? We see it in different models. Integrative neuromuscular training by Meyer et al., Avery Feigenbaum, talk about this idea of exercise deficit disorder. So within the idea of this model right here, we have coordination reaction time, motor competence, these pieces of the puzzle, along with metabolic physiologic measures, health-related fitness measures. We also see this in the idea of physical literacy, although after yesterday's program, I imagine we're not the use of the idea of fundamental motor skills with physical literacy and fitness maybe is not the best way to portray this, but still it's important within the idea of physical literacy. And then in physical education in the United States, we have Seefeld's triangle here with respect to understanding how we progress in movement over time and its importance in physical education. And also in strength and conditioning. So high-level strength and conditioning by Bampa, we look at this idea of multilateral development. And what does that mean? That's basically what we're talking about, motor competence. Now, there's one piece of the puzzle here where I want you to pay attention. This idea of a proficiency barrier, a motor competence proficiency barrier, and how it aligns at childhood and as we transition into adolescence. So think about this idea, developmental trajectories and proficiency barrier. And I'll show some data that speaks to this. And when we first start talking about developmental trajectory ideas, we as scientists like to make our causation models unidirectional. This causes this. But we know the human development, child development specifically, isn't that simple. So I'm presenting this idea in this model that early on, physical activity, right here, actually will drive motor competence. We develop motor milestones. All our spontaneous or exploratory movement promotes the development of these motor milestones. Being able to crawl, to walk, to be able to sit, posture-based ideas. So physical activity early on drives the development of motor competence, control and coordination of the human body. But once we get to a certain age, once we transition into middle to late childhood, then all of a sudden we begin to understand that maybe I'm not being successful, I'm not as skilled as this person over here, it's not fun anymore because I'm not successful. The other kids, I don't get picked, I can't play with other kids, and that's very debilitating for children when they can't interact with other kids for a long period of time. So if we figure out and develop this more sophisticated cognitive capacity of understanding, are we skilled? Are we competent enough to actually play? We begin to figure this out. Well, what happens then? And this is where I believe the model becomes more reciprocal or recursive in nature. So in terms of looking at early childhood, what's the direction of the causation in early childhood? Physical activity promotes motor competence. Perceived motor competence promotes motor competence. Because if we think we're successful, which in early childhood, to make it very simplistic, effort equals success. Great job. Awesome. Great job, kids. Great effort. Way to go. We believe that equals skill in young children. So to put it simplistically, if we provide motivation, caring, we help them, we provide that nurturing environment, that's going to promote more physical activity, which in essence promotes more motor competence because we keep trying, we keep doing it. However, again, once we transition into that middle childhood area, we begin to figure out that, oh, maybe we're not so skilled. So can I participate? Do I like to participate in things that I'm not successful at, aren't intrinsically motivated because they're not fun? That's where we begin to maybe see the spiral of engagement, either positive if we are motor competent or negative if we are not motor competent. That leads to all these negative aspects of obesity, higher body weight status, physical inactivity, and lower health-related fitness. It's an idea. So we have different directions of causation across time. It's different than we normally think about it. Again, we always want to go, this is the direction, this causes this. But let's think about it in a different way. It's not that simple in the human system. So let's talk about the evidence, the cumulative evidence. In 2010, Lubins et al. Provided the first systematic review of relationship of motor competence to physical activity, physical fitness, body weight status, and perceived competence. And overall, there were a whole 21 studies. Again, prior to 2008, when we published the model, there were a handful of studies, just a handful. In 2010, now we have 21. So this literature is emerging. Strong evidence for cardiorespiratory fitness, 4 out of 4 studies, and a composite fitness measure. So overall, motor competence is related to different aspects of fitness. In physical activity, 11 out of 13 studies that were provided in this review paper were positive. 2 demonstrated no association. Now again, these 2 pieces of the puzzle right here, these 2 studies that demonstrated a non-significant finding in early childhood. With respect to this model, we don't expect to see strong correlations or strong associations of motor competence to any of these pieces of the puzzle in early childhood. So that's a different thinking as well. We don't expect to see the relationships there. But over time, we expect those relationships to increase. The strengths of association between motor competence and all aspects of health, physical activity, physical fitness, body weight status should increase over time. That's what this model predicts. So, cardiorespiratory fitness, composite fitness, physical activity, body composition, only 5 out of 8 studies demonstrated an inverse association. 3 studies, again, non-significant. And the 3 studies, again, were more early childhood to middle childhood. So that was a first start. But now we have 2 new ones. 2014, relationship between motor competence and physical activity. 2 new review studies. So we have more evidence. Both pretty much strongly related physical activity and motor competence. Relationships, look at these correlations here. An R between 0.10 and 0.92. That's a pretty extreme range. Why is it? Difference in association, strength of associations across time. Logan et al., process-oriented. Hofelder and Schott was both product and process. Between MC, motor competence, and physical activity, they looked at both product and process. Logan et al. Used process-oriented assessments, but both found, primarily, there is an association between motor competence and physical activity, with rather large spans in terms of association strength. Even 0.2 to 0.55 is a pretty broad range. Hofelder and Schott suggested a cause-effect relationship between MC and PA, motor competence and physical activity, but this relationship has yet to be conclusively demonstrated. At what age? I believe it's different in terms of what time frame you're looking at across the lifespan. Logan et al., same idea. They actually indicated that there was a strong evidence for a positive association between motor competence and physical activity, but there was no change in strength of association across time. And that's, I believe, partially due to how we measure motor competence as well as how we measure physical activity. Pedometers, accelerometers, self-report. So we have many different ways in which we measure physical activity, and it's hard to compare effect sizes across time, across studies. Okay. So, motor competence and health-related fitness. Catuzzo et al. In a review, I actually helped out with this one. And now we have many more studies. Remember in 2010, there was 5 of 8 that talked about body weight status. Now, in this review, again following the idea of stronger evidence in a review article, 27 out of 33 studies demonstrated inverse associations. The other 6 were null associations. I believe there was one where there was a positive association, higher motor competence, higher body weight status. But for the most part, 27 out of 33 demonstrated inverse associations between motor competence and body weight status. Again, a wide range of association strengths. And positive associations, 12 out of 12 between motor competence and cardiorespiratory fitness. Again, large range. Positive associations between motor competence and different measures of muscular strength and endurance. Again, large association, large span of association strengths. Flexibility, there's not really a lot happening with flexibility. Flexibility in children and youth really doesn't correspond with anything else. It's all by itself. However, in this piece of the puzzle right here, so in this review, we actually demonstrated that associations tended to be stronger in adolescents as compared to younger children. So association strengths increase over time. Physical activity and physical self-concept. Now this is a review article, just came out again. There's quite a bit of data that suggests aspects of physical self-concept relate to physical activity. 64 studies included, and perceived competence was the strongest aspect of physical self-competence that associated with PA. And it's, low to moderate associations. Age moderated the relationship, although there was limited data on children. Why was there limited data on children? Possibly a publication bias, because they do not find relationships between perceived physical concept, or the concept of perceived competence, self-efficacy, in younger children, because that's what our model predicts. So possibly it didn't get published simply because they didn't find anything. Now, Here's some new data that we have right here. This age difference is also apparent with associations among perceived competence and actual motor competence. And we measured TGMD, a process-oriented assessment, and we also measured product, as in kicking speed, throwing speed, jumping distance, hopping speed, hopping distance. So we measured product, run speed. We measure product and process. In 4 and 5-year-old children, 7 and 8, 10 and 11, so across early to middle to late childhood. What did we find? Strength of associations between perceived motor competence and actual motor competence strengthened across age groups. So we're finding this. The interesting part about this data is it's the first to talk about difference in association between process-oriented movements and product-oriented movements assessments. And what did we see? Even in the young children, boys' product was significant, but in girls, wasn't significant. Boys' process versus product. If we look across here, product and process. Girls and boys perceive their motor competence differently based on whether or not it's their movement patterns or whether it's their product. And that's something that we haven't looked at in the literature really at all. But the big piece here again, strength of association changes across time, across age group. So, we talked about these differences in association strengths. Why are they variable? Well, we have problems with measurement of motor skills also. Many different skill assessments have been used across the literature. We have many different definitions of motor competence. So some of these assessments have questionable developmental validity, probable ceiling effects or floor effects for some assessments. Specifically, the process-oriented assessments aren't very sensitive or discriminating in terms of different levels. And we measure different constructs of motor competence, gross versus fine, object control versus locomotor, process versus product. And in some instances, we have a crossover when we're measuring health-related fitness. We have sometimes a fitness variable is called a motor competence variable, and sometimes a motor competence variable is called a fitness variable. So we have measurement issues with respect to understanding motor competence. As I stated before, we also have measurement issues related to physical activity, but we're getting better at it. So, another issue that we have in terms of understanding the relationship between motor competence and aspects of health, physical activity, health-related fitness, psychological variables, it lacks a developmental approach. And not many people talk about, well, it could be this direction in early childhood, but then as we transition into middle or late childhood, then it transitions this way, and this is causal. So think about that. Again, the human system is very complex, specifically children, as you all know, very complex. Perhaps we need to look at it globally and not just one unidimensionally, single dimension. All right? Does that make sense? Possibly. It's one of those things I usually ask and I can get a response in English, but I don't think I can get that here. So is what I'm saying making sense to you? Just please give me a nod, yes or no. Yes? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have some data. We'll start talking about these developmental trajectory ideas here. I'm going to use 2 data sets. We have across childhood, 4 to 13, and then we have an adult data set of 18 to 25. So we're looking at relationship between motor competence and aspects of health-related fitness. And funny thing with health-related fitness, they all load, whether it be children or adults, we're finding out that these aspects of health-related fitness load onto one concept. So we're going to call it fitness. Motor skill competence, we use product scores. Whoops. And statistical analysis, we use some nice fun regression. And what did we find? Well, again, look at change of association strengths across time. Age group, 4 and 5, all the way up to 18 to 25. And this is R-squared, so we have explained variance. Just understand, the numbers get bigger. The numbers get bigger with both throwing and kicking. Jumping, it's all over the place. It's a little bit strange. All health-related fitness measures in children and adults loaded on one fitness factor. We had a dramatic increase in explained variance across time, specifically for the object control skills. Barnett et al. Also showed that. Lisa Barnett from Australia is also demonstrating that object control may be more important later on. The jumping, we had issues here. We had predictors for sex as a mediator being a stronger predictor across late childhood into adolescence, but not necessarily into adulthood. Our adult data is very interesting, actually. So, strength of association changes across time. This was a good one. This is from the Portugal group, Vitor Lopes and Luis Paulo Rodriguez. And they're the first ones to actually, that I know of, actually separate children by motor competence levels. I think too many times we just lump all children together and call it one N, and we have a mean for all children in our sample. But here we separate it out by motor competence levels. And what happens with children who are in, and this is between 6 and 10 years of age, so we're transitioning into middle childhood. If children have high motor competence, both boys and girls, of course we always see boys demonstrate more physical activity than girls on average. But if we have high motor competence at 6 or 7 years of age and we track them longitudinally, they actually keep their physical activity levels. Versus the normal data we see is a decrease in physical activity. So individuals, if we break it by motor competence, individuals with high motor competence actually maintain their physical activity levels across time. Well, this is 3-year data. So average motor competence and low motor competence, we see that decrease in physical activity that we normally talk about or normally seem to see. Here's some other data. We have pilot data for about 411 kids. This is Jackie Goodway and myself. And again, strength of association between motor competence. And we measured TGMD, we measured developmental sequences, and we measured product. We measured a whole bunch of motor competence variables in all these kids at ages 4 and 5, 7 and 8, and 10 and 11. The strength of association, not significant in early childhood. It begins to show up in middle childhood. It gets stronger in later childhood. Strength of association increases across time. Data from De Hont et al., 2000 from Ghent. They have some fabulous data that they put together, both longitudinal and cross-sectional. This is a cross-sectional piece. Early on, there are differences between healthy weight and obese children at 5 to 7 years of age. But in the 8 to 9-year-old group, what happens? The differences get larger. The differences in motor competence or classifications of healthy weight status become larger over time. So up until here, notice our motor competence levels stay the same in terms of normative data in healthy weight individuals. But what happens in overweight and obese? What happens to their motor competence levels over time based on normative data? Pew! It plunges. Another different, the Portugal group, looking at trajectories. So we actually separated 3-year longitudinal trajectories of motor competence into what we call a low rate of change of fitness and motor skill, fitness and or motor skill, average rate of change, high rate of change. So in terms of standing long jump, there are a whole bunch of children over the span of 3 years that don't change in terms of raw data performance, how far they can standing long jump. Or many children, how fast they can run a 10-meter shuttle run. A lot of them don't change. Or how fast they can run a 50-meter dash. So we have data that says there's a whole lot of kids with raw data scores that says they don't change within a 2 or 3 year span from middle childhood to late childhood. And that goes against what we normally think. All children improve their motor skills over time. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. And does this relate to overweight and obesity? Yes, it does. Bigger odds ratios for higher versus lower motor skills. I have 1 minute. So what do these demonstrate? Change in strength of associations across time. What does the cumulative evidence say? We have, and this is we actually have a review of the model. Evidence to promote the idea of whether or not the model works or not. Do you support or refute these associations in the model? And we have extensively tested now, we believe, motor competence with physical activity, motor competence with health-related fitness, and weight status. So strong, positive, or inverse associations. Perceived competence to motor competence is positive. We haven't tested that enough. We have a mediating idea. The mediating idea that perceived competence mediates the relationship between physical activity and motor competence. We have data to support that, Barnett et al. From Australia. Let's look at this more holistically again. This model that I presented, where we have all these pieces of the puzzle, fitness, physical activity, psychological variables, put it all into the equation. If we measure it all, how does it predict overweight and obese status? Pretty well. However, not early on. Early on, Fitness, physical activity, motor skills, perceived competence do not predict weight status if you put them all together. And we measured a lot of variables. 7 and 8-year-olds, correct classification. We can correctly classify overweight or obese status 83% of the time, and it's stronger in the 10 and 11-year-old children. So put them all together. Again, it's not a holistic, it's not a this only is important. If you put them all together and look at the recursive relationships, the synergistic relationships between perceived competence, self-efficacy, self-worth, as it relates to motor competence, health-related fitness, and physical activity, put them all together. And how does it relate to weight status? Pretty well. Now, one little thing about process versus product assessments. Again, this basically demonstrates that depending on how you assess motor competence, it has differential relationships to health-related fitness. Proficiency barrier, if you'd allow me 1 minute with the proficiency barrier idea. What these data say basically is that out of 65 people who demonstrated a low motor competence score, out of 65, if you demonstrated low motor competence, you did not demonstrate good fitness. And we're not talking about, 90th percentile of fitness. We're talking about the 60th and above percentile of normative data for fitness. If you were on the low 35th percentile of motor skills, you did not demonstrate good fitness. And vice versa, motor competence with relating to poor fitness. If you were high in motor competence, you did not demonstrate low fitness. So you were at least moderate to good fitness. We have indirect and direct relationships, and they change across time. What is needed? We need more experimental data, but I think we need to understand that maybe we shouldn't look at it unidirectional across time, across the lifespan, and understand the recursive and synergistic nature of the relationships and how they can change over time. So thank you very much. Oh, I guess I'll need that if I need it.